In 1054, Pope Urban II declared a holy war to retake the city of Jerusalem out of the hands of the Seljuk Turks. By that point, that most holy of cities had been under Muslim control for something like 4 centuries. Long before the Seljuk Turks claimed dominion over Jerusalem, the Caliph Umar ibn al-Khattab conquered the city in 638 AD and allowed Jewish exiles to return to the city after centuries of exile following the Jewish-Roman Wars. However, a recent war between the Byzantine Empire and the Catholic Church presented a unique opportunity for the papacy to take the city for themselves. This is not their story. In the wake of Pope Urban II's declaration of holy war in the Council of Clermont, a wandering priest named Peter the Hermit revealed the horrific brutalities exhibited upon Christians in the Holy Land by their Muslim overlords. Mountains of martyred skulls, rivers of Christian blood, pilgrims forced to pay extortionist fines, and Christians forced to pay humiliating tribute to Muslim tyrants lest they face torture and death. The Christian peasantry of Western Europe, already inflamed by the declaration of holy war at the Council of Clermont, were whipped up into a zealous fury by Peter the Hermit's teachings. So much so that they decided to, en masse, take up arms and march to the Holy Land themselves, organized into loose mobs of peasant holy warriors in a phenomenon known as the People's Crusade. The only issue is that Peter the Hermit had never actually been to the Holy Land. Yeah, that's right. There are literally 0 primary sources, pieces of archaeological evidence, or anything of that matter that actually indicates that Peter the Hermit had ever been to the city of Jerusalem. That did not stop him from starting a movement which, in the context of Trench Crusade, had far-reaching implications into the future. In our world, the People's Crusade was a short-lived, violent, and extremely disorganized mob of religious zealots who plundered their way across Central Europe on their way to the Holy Land. Once they had arrived to the rescue of the Byzantine Empire, they were almost immediately butchered by the Seljuk Turks when they were led into an ambush. Fucking idiots. And in the real world, that's where their story ends. But in Trench Crusade, this was the beginning of a new phenomenon of the early modern battlefield. Trench Pilgrims.
Part 1. What is a Trench Pilgrim? You know, Sally, you probably should have started with this.
Yeah, no, you're right, but the historical context is important, I think. I hope. Who am I kidding? I just want people to think I'm smart. In any event, what is a Trench Pilgrim? Well, I'll tell you what they aren't. They aren't an army, an organized movement, or a regulated militia. What a Trench Pilgrim is a procession. Processions of the faithful, who fight with whatever weapons they can get their hands on, led by prophets and occasionally accompanied by official representatives of the Holy See. They are not officially sanctioned armies of the Holy See of Rome, nor are they officially organized under any one state's military. They are the massed hordes of the maddened faithful, spurred on to the front lines by collective visions and prophecies. They march on, wielding improvised or stolen weaponry, on a path dictated to them by their own agonizing divine sight, their only uniformity being a lack of uniformity. Sure, there are some symbols which are largely universal across the Christian faith. The cross, the iron capirote, the 7 stigmatad hands of the many metachrists, but all reflect a local culture. British Catholics have different symbols and value different saints than French Catholics, than German Catholics, etc. Local organizations are wrapped up in the functionings of the church more intimately when regarding Catholic institutions. So your Trench Pilgrims can and often will look like any group of people from any part of the world. And they can even be an extremely eclectic mix, as more zealots get swept up into the mob as it makes its way through the trench line. Once they arrive at the front lines, their goal is to fight demons and heretics until they either are brutally killed or no enemies remain. No plan, no grand strategy, just charge forward and take down as many heretics and demons as you can on your way out. They are, by design, gigantic processions of near-suicidal warriors who are either maddened by visions of the divine or clinically insane, with no practical distinction. This equips them to charge into battle with an unmatched ferocity, and their warriors charge across overlapping fields of fire with a maddened zealotry. If it sounds like I'm repeating myself, it's because there's frankly not much else to talk about. They are pretty much exactly what they say they are on the tin. There is very little regarding deep lore for this faction. They are meant to represent the myriad, infinitely diverse, roving bands of zealot bandit crusaders that roam the trench lines. So at this point, the only thing left to do is to just talk about the units that comprise this army.
Part 2. The Chosen and the Faithful.
Chief among the warriors of the Trench Pilgrims is the War Prophet, the only unit you have to take upon warband creation. The War Prophet is the aforementioned de facto leader of the Pilgrim procession, spurred on to lead their flock into glorious martyrdom by visions of Armageddon, with +2 dice in both melee and ranged combat, loudspeakers that whip up their supplicants into a maddened frenzy, and favor from heaven that allows them to not only cheat death, but allow them to heal their comrades. The War Prophet is both a powerful supporting unit, as well as an incredibly dangerous all-around combatant. Looking more specifically at their abilities, the loudspeaker is a +2 risky action, which means you roll 46 and take the 2 highest. And if those numbers add up to 7 or higher, then all friendly models within 8 inches of the War Prophet may immediately move up to 3 inches. The only stipulation is that it has to be toward the closest enemy model. If the closest enemy model also happens to be within 3 inches, then, well, your friendly model can simply just move into combat as if they had charged. However, because it is a risky action, if the result is lower than 7, then the Prophet's activation simply ends immediately. So it's better to wait until you've already done things like move the Prophet and shoot their guns before you tried to do the loudspeaker. Memento Mori is a once per game ignore death. The first time the War Prophet is taken out of action, they just, don't. And finally, the Lay on Hands ability allows them to remove up to D3 blood markers from any friendly model within 6 inches, including themselves. Though you do have to succeed on an action to do so, but not a risky one, so it's fine to do this whenever you want. All in all, this creates an extremely versatile unit that will usually make up the offensive backbone of your list. Splurge as much as you want gearing this character out. It's going to always be worth it. Personally, I like to give them heavy armor, a gas mask, an iron capirote, a submachine gun, and an anti-tank hammer. A shield and any combination of melee weapon or submachine gun would also work excellently. Right. Moving on from that, we have the Castigator. Castigators are those members of the warband who have elected themselves to the maintenance of the group's spiritual purity, keeping the righteous on the path to glory and brutally punishing any who have strayed from total obeisance. By instilling the fear of God into their own men, they can raise their own troops from a downed state, inspire loyalty within the men by brutally beating friendly models, and can optionally come with the strong keyword for a few extra ducats. The Enforced Orthodoxy ability is a +1 risky action that, if successful, immediately stands up all downed friendly models from within 8 inches of the castigator. The Whip of God ability allows the castigator to attack friendly models within 1 inch, and each friendly model taken out of action this way adds +1 to morale checks. Wanna know a fun fact? I actually came up with this ability. Way back during the 28 mag server era, I said it'd be cool if the Witchburner's Divine Judgment ability could apply blood markers to friendly models. And I wanted this because it would create a really interesting synergy with Stigmatic Nuns, which is a unit we'll be discussing later. But instead of applying it to the Witchburner General, they gave a similar ability to the Castigator. So, I don't know. I just find it really cool that every single time a Castigator whips a friendly model, you are witnessing an element of the game I helped create during the game's very early playtests. However, one thing I didn't create was the Zealot Strength upgrade, which allows you to spend 5 extra ducats to give your Castigator the Strong keyword. Now, Strong is incredibly powerful, because it lets you treat one two-handed weapon as being a one-handed weapon, which means you can do things like carry a greatsword or a polearm and a shield. The Castigator's +1 to both melee and ranged means you can actually make them be pretty scary, especially with the strong keyword. An excellent unit all around. The last of the elites is the Communicant, devotees who cannibalized the flesh of a cloned Metachrist, mutating into a monstrous hulking abomination, literally nailing a cross to their face to show their devotion. These are strong, tough, hard to put down warriors who are willing to take hits for their allies. With -3 to ranged and +2 to melee, this is a dedicated melee bruiser. They have the strong and tough keywords, which means they not only ignore the penalties to the heavy weapon keyword, it also means they have to be taken out of action twice to actually be put down. Miracle of Regeneration means they remove 1 blood marker at the start of each of their activations. And the Bodyguard special rule means they can redirect any attacks targeting models within 1 inch of them onto themselves. Give one of these heavy armor and the biggest fuck-off melee weapon you can find, and watch them clobber the enemy team to death. An extremely straightforward unit. That brings us to the end of the elites, which are units you can only include one of in any given warband. Now we are moving on to the troops, which you can include any number of in your warband, with a few exceptions. Starting with the Trench Pilgrim, your basic bitch zealot. They exist to die. You can upgrade them with the strong keyword for 5 extra ducats, which can make them shockingly dangerous in melee. But frankly, I don't think they're worth spending the extra points on. Give them the bare minimum regarding equipment, and take a few of them in order to stand on objectives, hold musical instruments and banners, things of that nature. To invoke a competitive 40k term, these guys are your action monkeys. However, as much as Trench Pilgrims exist to die, ecclesiastic prisoners literally exist to die. They are, in effect, suicide bombers. If you remember before, I said that one of the Castigator's roles was to horrifically punish those who stray too far from orthodoxy. This is what I meant. Sinners bound in chains, and given one final chance to prove their loyalty to God, so that their sins may be wiped away and their souls can be accepted into heaven. They do this by strapping a tactical fucking nuke to their back and running at the enemy. Their only abilities is that they do not count as out of action for the purposes of calculating morale saves, and that they roll +1 dice to dash actions. Fucking grim. Like, I thought Jewish wine mom guilt was bad. I have never been guilt-tripped so hard I had to strap a bomb to myself. We've talked about the anvils, now here are the hammers. Stigmatic nuns. You can take up to 4 of them. They get +1 dice to ranged, +1 dice to melee. A good stat line. However, their stat line is actually much better than it would seem on the surface, and that's because of the Blessed Stigmata ability. Remember how I said I thought it'd be a cool unit synergy if a friendly unit could apply blood markers to Stigmatic Nuns? Well, that's because Stigmatic Nuns can convert blood markers into blessing markers, which work in reverse. You spend a blessing marker to give your unit +1 bonus dice to an action. So really that +1 to melee is +1 plus their blessing markers. That's why I thought something like the Castigator's Whip of God ability would be really cool. And why I recommended they put it in the game, and guess what, motherfucker? They did! They did! I'm gonna be gloating about that for the rest of my fucking life. This, along with the fact that Stigmatic Nuns add +1 dice to both dash actions and charge actions, makes them one of the most dangerous melee units in the entire game. Give them a sword and a trench shield, and you have a truly terrifying whirlwind of death upon the battlefield. Finally, last, but sure as shit not least, is the Shrine Anchorite. A unit so cool, it required a full page for its unit art, just to make sure you knew how fucking cool it was. The Shrine Anchorite is essentially if the Pain Box from Dune was an Iron Maiden and was also a mech. If you locked a monk inside that mech permanently. You can only include 1 Shrine Anchorite in your warband, and it always has the same loadout. The Catherine Wheel and the Bonebreaker Mace. The Catherine Wheel gives +1 dice to hit, and has the keywords risky and heavy, but rolls 3d6 and adds them all together when determining the result of injury rolls. They're also ridiculously tanky, with a base armor of -3 and the tough special rule. You can also select a single model from your army before the start of the game to be broken upon the wheel. For the duration of the game, the model will then act as a human shield, redirecting attacks from the Anchorite and onto themselves. Which essentially means the Shrine Anchorite also has 2 health bars. This is a boss monster if I've ever seen one, and they are terrifying to fight on the battlefield. But with that being said, that's all the units available to the Trench Pilgrims. I'm not counting mercenaries because, frankly, I think those deserve their own video. Now that we know what options are available to you, I should probably talk at least a little bit about how to use those options. And I do mean a little bit because, frankly, this army is extremely straightforward. You've probably noticed a common through line throughout the units available to the Trench Pilgrims. Stigmatic Nuns add +1 to dashes and charges. Ecclesiastic Prisoners add +1 to dashes. The Warp Prophet can make all friendly models within a giant aura do a free, out-of-sequence 3-inch movement. Castigators allow all units within that same sized aura to stand up if they've been knocked down for free. Trench Pilgrims have one game plan, and it's to get close to you, no matter how much firepower you throw at them. They're going to march up the board incredibly quickly with out-of-sequence movement actions and bonuses to dashes, and they're going to get a charge sooner than you expect. And when they get into melee, they're going to do more damage than you expect too. Once they're this close, you've lost the game. This is what makes Trench Pilgrims scary to fight. They are incredibly straightforward. Their game plan is so simple and transparent that you already know what they're going to be doing far before the game ever actually begins. But their stat lines are so good, and their mobility is so busted, that you might not be able to do anything about it. You want a strategy guide for Trench Pilgrims? Bunch all your models up within 8 inches of your war profit. Scream up the board, and bash your opponent's fucking face in. The harder you think, the worse you'll play. Because you are not a strategist. You are a guerrilla. And you are going to unga-bunga on some heretics until you've instilled the fear of God into them. Go now, my child, and win a tournament.
Part 3. The Procession and the Cavalcade.
I want to finish this video off by briefly discussing the 2 warband variants available to the Trench Pilgrims. The Procession of the Sacred Affliction and the Cavalcade of the 10th Plague. The Procession of the Sacred Affliction are Trench Pilgrims who perform penance by intentionally contracting leprosy. They are psychotic and may elect one model to be a crazed, naked berserker who cannot suffer from blood markers and is immune to fear, but cannot wear armor or wield ranged weapons. They remove elite restrictions on AT hammers and holy icon shields, and the elites of the Sacred Affliction may purchase holy icon armor, conferring a -1 to injury rolls, even against attacks that would normally ignore armor. Whereas the Trench Pilgrim's default variation at least pays lip service to the concept of ranged combat, the Sacred Affliction variation fully plays into the melee focus, making it not merely a focus, but a requirement. This is essentially a more extreme version of the basic unit roster. The Cavalcade of the 10th Plague is interesting in their lore implications, which I won't really get into, but from a gameplay perspective, they are a procession obsessed with the concept of blood sacrifice. Any model in the warband may purchase a sacrificial lamb, a consumable which they can kill in order to negate the first blood marker they take in a given game. They can only take up to 2 ecclesiastic prisoners, and replace the war prophet's lay on hands ability with a 3-inch injury zap that ignores armor. They also need to purchase communicants with glory points instead of ducats because they detest their use. But they have extra favor with the big man upstairs, and so generate 1 blessing marker at the start of every round that they can give to any of their models. This is a much more interesting variation in my opinion, with much more limiting restrictions, but much more pronounced upsides. Personally, I prefer the Procession of the Sacred Affliction. I think that it takes the already extremely polarized playstyle of the Pilgrims and cranks the notch so far up that it somehow loops back around to being pretty unique. With that being said, that's the Trench Pilgrims.
Part 4. Conclusion.
If you've watched this far into the video, you've realized a long time ago if this is the army for you. They're an incredibly straightforward, incredibly blunt warband. But for those who are still somehow undecided, if you like melee, more melee, fast melee, tough melee, aura buffing melee, bomb jacket melee, weirdly erotic melee, then this is the faction for you. If you like shooting, or complex mechanics, or anything of that nature, stay very, very far away. The Trench Pilgrims aren't everyone's cup of tea, but those who can find a home amongst them won't feel nearly as comfortable anywhere else. So go ahead, go apeshit. I know you want to. Wow, thanks a ton for watching until the end of the video, but before you go, there's one more thing I want to talk about. Almost all of my videos are about tabletop games, and in many points, I've made videos about tabletop game design. If you've liked those videos, then I would recommend you check out my game studio, Sword and Board Games. We're a small team of 4 tabletop wargamers who are making the kinds of games that we want to see. Our first and currently only available project is a game called TUSC, the Universal Skirmish Combat Engine. And you can think of it as a skirmish war game that you can play with literally any collection of models. If that idea interests you, then there's going to be links down in the description. Okay, that's it. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you again for watching to the end of the video. Have a fantastic day.